Hello, and welcome to Bake to the Future. In today's episode, we're joined by a representative from Ardent Mills, a proud AVA Prem Allied member. They're here to talk about regenerative agriculture and how Ardent Mills is working directly with farmers to advance sustainable practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve soil health, and strengthen the environment. Joining me today is Phoenix Duggar, Senior Manager of ESG at Ardent Mills. Phoenix, welcome. Can you introduce yourself and Ardent Mills to our audience?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Ardent Mills is the nation's leading flour producer, so we've got over 35 locations across North America. Every day our products touch over 100 million people. So really awesome opportunity for scale, for impact, and to do meaningful work through the Regenerative program. My role at Ardent Mills, I've been there for just close to 10 years now. Most of that time has been spent in some way around sustainability. Today I lead our full ESG program, so everything from our community impact with our nonprofit partners, university partners, internal sustainability, so finding ways to optimize our flour mills and emerging nutrition facilities to make them more efficient from an energy consumption perspective and waste perspective. And then, of course, our supply chain, so non-wheat vendors that we work with, packaging, ingredients, and those types of things, and then as well as our Regenerative program, which is certainly our longest standing program within the sustainability space at Ardent Mills.
Sounds like you have a lot of great experience to share with us today. To kick things off, my first question is, in areas where environmental conditions limit common regenerative agriculture practices, what does successful adaptation look like? And how can supply chain partners ensure that sustainability programs reflect those on-the-ground realities rather than a one-size-fits-all approach?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the biggest thing that we try to do and what role we try to play as Ardent Mills, being that connector from the farmer to the CPG or to the brand, really, that's interacting with those consumers directly, is try to fill that gap, right? So we know through our farmers and through the folks that we talk to every day, no two growing regions are the same. Even within a state, there can be vast differences if you're in the western part of the state or the eastern part of the state. And so having that perspective and having partners on the ground that can help us identify those differences is really key. And working with our customer partners to understand really what are their overall goals and what are they trying to do to advance either emissions reduction or practice adoption or those types of things. And so helping that starting point is really helpful. But then also just looking at what can be broadly applicable, right? As you're trying to build trust with the growers and as you're trying to also still make progress towards these goals. So really for us, what that means in terms of how that comes to life is working with a lot of boots on the ground partners that live and breathe those areas, that work with growers in those areas every day, down to like a county level, right? So very specific local knowledge, very specific grower relationships that they've built throughout their careers. Because they're going to know the unique challenges. They're going to know how more rain in one year helps or hurts a practice adoption potential. They're going to know not just the theory, but actually how these things come to life. And so that grounded approach, I think, is one key just for success in getting growers to have resilience and strong retention through the program, but also in terms of building trust, not just with the growers, but also with consumers. We see from consumers and the insights work that our team does, really that 29% of consumers on the high end say that they're familiar with Regen Ag and what it means. So as much as we can do to help them understand all the nuances and how this actually comes to life and how you actually make change and meaningful impact with growers is really helpful in building that credibility for our customer partners and their end consumers at the store shelf.
Absolutely. And it sounds like relationships with both farmers and consumers and that transparency is so important. As that demand for transparency grows, what's needed to make that data collection both credible for brands and practical for farmers, as you mentioned that two pieces, and how can we better align the information farmers are asked to track with what brands are actually using to tell their story to consumers?
Yeah, the starting point always is and always should be with the farmer, right? So the practicality word is important there. How do we make this practical and feasible to scale for the grower? And I think for us, the best way we found how to do that is to really intentional and specific conversations with our customer partners before we even start the program. So what exactly are their goals? How exactly are they measuring those goals? down to what protocols they try to use, what calculation methodologies. But the bigger picture items, right, are they more interested in carbon reduction? Are they more interested in practice adoption? Are there specific other crops they're interested in having data on and storytelling opportunities on? And then what's the timeline, right? Are they working on a 2050 goal? Or are they working on a 2030 goal? Those are two very different things, and it really changes the way that we interact with those growers. Once we know that, and once we have real clarity documented there, then we can really pick the right partner that can help us engage the grower in that way. And so if we know it's around emissions, right, then we're going to need a lot more data, and we're going to need it in a very specific way. But having that clarity helps us when we go out to the grower to be very upfront and clear about that, and what the needs are going to be, what the incentives are going to be to help with that data transfer and the amount of rigor that is going to be expected of them. And also have the right partner that can coach that grower through that and make sure that any questions they have are answered clearly, the expectations are clear, and the outcomes and how they're going to be incentivized is also clear. And so it's not always the easiest way to do it, but in terms of us, the simplest way to achieve a goal and the simplest way to serve both the grower and the customer, it's been the most helpful for us as we scaled.
Which makes a lot of sense, especially if the goals are changing, the methodology is changing. And a big piece of what you talked about there was consumers increasingly want proof of impact, not just the promises that it's happening. So when you think about how can regenerative agricultural programs create shared value that builds trust between farmers and brands and consumers, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the impact, I think, is the area where consumers have the most yearning for more clarity, right? They understand that it's a good thing, but they don't quite know what that means or how it shows up in their bag of flour or their box of cereal or whatever it is that they're purchasing, that they're trying to support their dollars with from a regen perspective. And so that transparency and accountability is really important in terms of how do we show progress over time. And for us, it starts with the primary data. The data that we're going to be using to calculate these things is actual management practice data from actual farmers in those supply sheds. And also being willing to say, this is going to fluctuate over time, right? Mother Nature always is the last one in the batting order. And so she's going to have the most impact on what happens on farm and also what that grower does. So if it's a really heavy rain year or a light rain year, that's going to impact fertilizer application. That's going to impact what other practices they have to do if they're going to till to try and help with weed pressure, those types of things, right? And so having that transparency and being that voice of the grower through the supply chain, I think, is also key. But using those stories and examples of what are real world examples where a grower maybe had to do something that wouldn't immediately trigger as regenerative or the most sustainable option. Why did they do that? What was the outcome they saw? And how does that compare to their peer set? How does that compare to national average for that year? Trying to be able to still tell that story of they are still the ultimate stewards of the land. This is of utmost importance to them. And so what decisions did they make to best optimize their farm, to best optimize their yield? And ultimately, what impact did that have, I think, is also key. And that goes a long way, not just with the consumer, being transparent and saying when things had to change and things were different than maybe what we all previously expected, but it also goes a long way with the grower, being flexible and being able to say, okay, yeah, we understand something came up. We understand you had to apply more fertilizer than you thought. We understand weed pressure was higher. Maybe you had to till more than you previously thought. But what other things did you still do to try and optimize your inputs, optimize your yield, be the best steward you can be? And having that type of conversation with the grower as opposed to just, you didn't say what we thought you were going to do, or you didn't do what you were going to do. It's a lot better way to approach a conversation, because what we're after is long-term partnership, right? These changes don't happen in 2 years or 3 years. That's hardly enough time for one wheat rotation. We're in this for 10, 15, 20 years in most cases. And so that really helps build trust with the grower as well. And I think that patience has been really helpful for us as well. And sometimes that means, right, that the weather and other external factors to the grower outside of their control presented different opportunities. And so what things can we do to just start small and practice changes that are available everywhere, available in most weather patterns, weather events, growing events that can really be applicable for all growers, regardless of what's happening. And so start small, start to build over time, work into those bigger practice changes that take a little more effort and a little more risk. And ultimately, I think that helps with the long-term viability of the program as well.
Absolutely. And kind of you're touching upon that trust that comes between the growers along with their brand commitments and how that really works together over time. What have you seen in terms of incentives or partnership structures that give the farmers that assurance and that peace of mind that they can invest in those long-term regenerative transitions that you were talking about?
Yeah, I think early on, right, we were still very much figuring out the incentive structures and all of those things. Over the last 7 or 8 years, as we've gotten a lot more practice at it, a lot more feedback from growers and consumers, we know that everyone has to have some skin in the game. And so there has to be funding for just the data they're sharing. There has to be funding for the practices that we're asking them to trial on farm. And if we're going after emissions, right, and they do things that are higher yielding from an emissions perspective, things that reduce more or remove more carbon from their management system.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up?
No, thank you for the time. This has been a great conversation and fun to talk.
Absolutely. Well, Phoenix, thank you for taking the time out of your day and for sharing your insights with our audience. If you're a prospective ABA member or a current member, we'd love to hear from you. Email membership@americanbakers.org anytime to get connected to the ABA team. And let us know what you thought of this show by emailing hello@americanbakers.org. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.